At the start of the story, a man catches a huge fish, but instead of looking happy, his face is filled with sadness. Even after catching such a massive fish, there is no excitement in him. In fact, he has already caught several fish. He carefully places them inside a container and heads back to his shelter. His shelter is actually the wreckage of a crashed airplane. It soon becomes clear that he survived a plane crash and has been struggling to stay alive alone in the frozen Arctic for an unknown amount of time. His daily life is incredibly harsh. Fish are his only source of food, and he has no choice but to eat them raw. After finishing his meal, he gets back to work. He picks up a generator and climbs the tallest nearby mountain. Once he reaches the top, he sends out a weak radio signal, hoping that a passing aircraft will detect it and come to rescue him. In the Arctic, it is difficult to tell the difference between day and night, so he relies on his watch to keep track of time. Before going to sleep, he lays out his sleeping bag, puts on several thick layers of clothing, and covers himself completely to protect against the freezing cold. Every day, he also visits a particular spot where there is a pile of stones. He carefully clears away the snow covering it. It looks as if he is taking care of someone's grave, perhaps that of his wife or a close friend. He digs into the ground and brings out lighter-colored stones so they stand out clearly against the white snow and the dark soil. At a fixed time each day, he leaves that place. From a distance, it becomes clear that he has arranged the snow and stones into a giant SOS sign so that aircraft flying overhead can spot it. After that, it is time to catch fish. Using thick ropes and wires, he has built a simple fishing device. One day, his fishing line suddenly snaps. It seems that an unusually large fish had taken the bait. Just then, a large metal bell starts ringing. Realizing that something has been caught, he immediately runs over and begins pulling on the line. But catching fish is not his only priority. Sending out a rescue signal is just as important, so he constantly keeps an eye on everything around him. He fears that the mysterious giant creature he had seen before might appear again. One day, while returning after sending out his radio signal, he spots that enormous figure once more. It looks like a massive animal standing in the distance, watching his shelter and waiting for the right moment. Days continue to pass. Cleaning the grave, maintaining the SOS sign, catching fish and sending radio signals become part of his daily routine. Then one day, while he is on top of the mountain transmitting his signal, he notices thick black clouds gathering in the distance. Suddenly, the signal light on his equipment turns on. His heart starts racing. He quickly runs the generator even faster. In his excitement, he even takes off his hat and looks around. A moment later, he sees a helicopter flying across the sky. Hope returns to his eyes. He immediately pulls out a smoke flare and waves it with all his strength. At last, the helicopter changes direction and starts heading toward him. After so many days, he finally believes that his rescue is certain, but fate still isn't on his side. Just as the helicopter is about to land, a powerful, icy gust of wind hits it. The pilot loses control. The helicopter spins twice in the air before crashing straight into the ground. The man who had seen hope only seconds earlier is once again swallowed by despair. Tears fill his eyes as happiness, grief, anger, and helplessness all overwhelm him at once. After a few moments, he gathers himself and runs toward the crash site with all his strength. He breaks open the helicopter door and climbs inside. The male pilot is already dead, but there is also a woman inside. Her seatbelt has saved her life, although she is badly injured. He immediately takes out the first aid kit and begins dressing her wounds. Her breathing is very weak. She can barely speak or even move. After taking care of her, the man is completely exhausted and falls asleep inside the helicopter. The next morning, an alarm wakes him up. He starts searching the helicopter for anything useful. He finds an ice axe, 2 signal flares, a large map, and a few packs of instant noodles. He immediately opens one of the noodle packs and eats it dry. For the first time in many months, he finally tastes something other than fish. After that, he prepares to return to his shelter. He removes one of the helicopter doors and turns it into a makeshift sled. Before leaving, he writes on the helicopter that there are 2 survivors and that one woman is seriously injured. He carefully lays the woman on the sled and slowly drags her back to his shelter. Pulling her across the snow is extremely difficult. Once they arrive, he places her on his bed. He then finds her identification card and realizes that the 2 of them are from different countries. He repeatedly asks her to squeeze her fist so she can stay conscious and not lose awareness. He covers her with all of his extra clothes before heading back to the helicopter to collect the remaining supplies. By then, the pilot's body has completely frozen. The man removes his clothes so they can be put to use, then builds him a grave there using snow and stones. Inside the helicopter, he also finds a gas stove and a lighter. When he lights the stove, he sees a real flame burning in front of him for the first time in many months. He stretches out his hands toward it and quietly feels its warmth. To him, it feels nothing short of a miracle. He also discovers a family photograph. Looking at it fills his heart with sorrow, and he quietly slips the picture into his jacket pocket. As he finishes gathering the supplies and is about to leave, he hears strange noises coming from behind the helicopter. When he goes to check, he finds a real snow sled lying there. For the first time in months, a smile appears on his face. He looked at the weak sled he had built himself, then at the newly found snow sled. With it, his journey might finally become a little easier. That night, he lit the gas stove and enjoyed its warmth. He placed the woman's family photo beside the window. A deep sense of guilt weighed on him. He believed that if he had never signaled the helicopter, that family might still be living a happy life together. Now he also had a large, detailed map. He had tried to leave this place before, but had never managed to get very far. This time, he carefully began planning a new route. Just then, the fishing bell started ringing loudly again. He rushed to his fishing trap and began pulling the line. This time, luck was on his side. He caught a huge, thick Arctic fish. He immediately used it to make a delicious fish soup. He tasted a piece of the fish first. For the first time in months, he was eating warm, freshly cooked food. After that, he prepared the instant noodles and tried to feed the injured woman as well. She managed to swallow only a tiny piece of fish with great difficulty. After that, she could no longer even open her mouth. Over the next several days, the man continued following the same daily routine, but there was still no sign of a rescue team. Gradually, all of his medicine ran out, and the woman's condition showed no improvement. He realized that if he didn't do something soon, she would certainly die. That night, he couldn't sleep at all. Guilt and worry kept eating away at him. The next morning, he unfolded the map he had found in the helicopter and marked a route that looked relatively flat. After making his plan, he climbed the nearly 1,000-meter mountain once again and looked out across the endless frozen landscape. Staring at the vast white wilderness stretching in every direction, he finally made a life-changing decision. He decided that no matter what happened, he would cross this deadly frozen land. He packed all the fish he had recently caught into his bag and filled a bottle with drinking water. Once everything was ready, he securely fastened the injured woman onto the sled. Leaving behind his temporary but relatively safe shelter, he finally set off on the journey. Dragging the sled across the soft snow was incredibly exhausting. But even more important than the physical effort was staying on the right path. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but endless white snow. There were no landmarks, no trees, and nothing to guide him. Whenever he reached a rocky hill or any unusual land formation, he immediately took out the map and marked his current location to make sure he wasn't losing his way. Before long, he realized he had greatly underestimated how difficult it would be to pull the sled. This was not only a test of his physical strength, but also a brutal test of his determination and mental endurance. Several hours passed, and darkness slowly began to fall. He decided to spend the night beneath a snowy hillside. Digging into the snow, he created a pit large enough for both of them. It acted as a natural insulator, blocking the freezing wind outside while trapping warmth inside. This would help prevent the woman's body temperature from dropping too quickly. The next morning, they continued along the planned route. Soon, they faced the first major obstacle of the journey. A steep slope stood directly in their path. It was almost 60 degrees and looked completely different from what the map had shown. Alarmed, he quickly checked the map again. He hadn't gone off course. The real problem was that if he chose to go around the mountain instead of crossing it, the journey would become nearly 5 times longer. He didn't have enough food or water for such a long detour. More importantly, the woman's condition was so serious that she probably wouldn't survive such a long trip. He climbed the slope alone first to inspect the situation. Once he reached the top, he saw that the land on the other side was fairly flat. However, the steep climb in front of him looked like an absolute nightmare. He managed to pull his supplies up first. Somehow, that part worked. Then he tied ropes to the sled and used all his strength to pull the woman upward. But he had underestimated how heavy she was. After several attempts, he nearly slipped and fell down the slope himself. As he looked across the wide, open snowfield, a thought crossed his mind. Should he leave the woman behind and continue alone? After all, no one would ever know if he abandoned her there. But after struggling with the thought for a few moments, his conscience won. He threw that idea away forever, crossed out the original route on the map, and chose a different path instead. Now, with the woman still beside him, he continued in another direction. After walking for another 4 or 5 hours, he realized they had to rest. At the base of a mountain, he spotted a natural cave. He looked inside and found that it seemed safe. Gathering all his strength, he dragged the sled into the cave. The cave was much larger than he had expected. There was enough room to light the small gas stove and cook food comfortably. That night, he tried feeding the woman again, but she had become so weak that she couldn't even open her mouth. She wasn't even able to drink water anymore. The freezing cold only continued to make her condition worse. Later that night, as the man was preparing to sleep, a massive polar bear suddenly appeared outside the cave. The sight of the bear froze his blood. He instinctively stepped backward in fear. The bear was so enormous that its entire body couldn't fit inside the cave. It could only push its head through the entrance, but the real problem was that the bear was intelligent. It began digging through the snow, blocking the entrance. If it kept digging, it would soon be able to get inside. The man immediately lit one of his signal flares. Holding the burning flare in his hand, he charged straight toward the bear. The sudden fire and bright light startled it. The bear backed away, and after a few moments, finally ran off. His life had been saved, but the fear stayed with him. He remained curled up in the corner of the cave for a long time, trembling with fear. The next morning, he gathered the courage to step outside and looked around. There was no sign of the polar bear anywhere. He placed the woman back on the sled, and they continued their journey. Several days passed, and they had traveled an unknown distance. Then one day, a violent snowstorm suddenly swept across the Arctic. The wind was so powerful that he could barely keep his eyes open. He immediately drove a metal rod deep into the snow, tied the ropes to it, and decided to stay where he was. He and the woman climbed into the sleeping bag and waited through the night. By the time the storm finally passed, both of them were almost buried beneath the snow. With great difficulty, the man crawled out of the sleeping bag. He realized that his hands had become badly frozen. Even the smallest movement sent waves of pain through his entire body. He kept breathing warm air onto his hands again and again, but it brought very little relief. Even so, he refused to give up. Enduring the pain, he climbed down and even burned his own bag to keep the woman warm, but their situation continued to grow worse. The woman's wounds had become infected. She had a high fever, pus was coming out of her injuries, and she had fallen unconscious. Her breathing had become extremely weak, and blood had started seeping from the corners of her mouth. The man realized that she was on the verge of death. Tears rolled down his face. At last, he made a painful decision. He thought that perhaps he should leave her behind and continue alone. But the moment he took a few steps, the ground beneath him suddenly gave way. He fell straight into a deep crevasse. When he regained consciousness, he discovered that his right leg was tightly trapped between two rocks. He struggled with all his strength to pull it free, but nothing worked. Looking at his own miserable condition, he suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. He couldn't understand why fate kept playing such cruel games with him. Eventually, exhausted, he collapsed onto the ground. The man who had stayed as strong as steel for so many days finally broke down, and tears streamed from his eyes. But he refused to die inside that dark crevasse. He gathered his courage once again. Gripping the edge of the rocks tightly with both hands, he found a place to brace his left foot. Taking one deep breath, he threw all of his strength into one desperate pull down. The pain was unbearable, and he screamed in agony out. The first attempt failed, but he didn't stop. He tried again, then a third time. Finally, on the third attempt, his leg came free. Dragging his injured leg behind him, he climbed out of the crevasse and slowly limped back toward the woman. He didn't want to die alone. When he opened the woman's sleeping bag, a miracle awaited him. She was still alive. The moment he saw her breathing, tears of joy filled his eyes. He kept apologizing to her over and over, saying that he should never have thought about leaving her behind. At the same time, he thanked her because the fact that she was still alive had given him a reason to keep living. He removed his muffler and tied it tightly around his injured leg to stop the bleeding. Then, with the woman still on the sled, he continued moving forward. Days passed. All of their food was gone. He had even given the very last drop of water to the woman. To keep himself alive, he sucked on snow and even swallowed the blood that seeped from his cracked lips. His body was completely worn out. Even walking across flat ground now felt as difficult as climbing a mountain. Whenever they reached an uphill slope, his condition became even worse. To make the sled lighter, he began throwing away his belongings one by one, even the things that meant the most to him. Eventually, things became so desperate that he was forced to leave behind his most valuable possession. He threw away his signal transmitter because he no longer had the strength to carry it. After that, he climbed a steep ridge alone. His plan was to reach the top first and see what lay ahead, hoping to find even the slightest sign of hope. But this time, fate had one final surprise waiting for him. The moment he reached the top, he looked toward the sky. A helicopter was flying in the distance. For a few seconds, he couldn't believe his own eyes. After enduring endless hunger, freezing cold, pain, and suffering, the chance for rescue had suddenly appeared before him. The sight was so unexpected that he stood there frozen for a moment. Then he snapped back to reality. Sliding down the slope as fast as he could, he rushed back to the woman. Gathering every bit of strength he had left, he pushed her sled uphill and somehow managed to bring it to the top. He immediately lit a signal flare and waved it through the air with all his remaining strength, desperately calling for help. But there was no response from the helicopter. His heart began pounding with fear. He thought the pilot might not have seen him. Without wasting another second, he took off his outer jacket and started waving it over his head with both hands. He kept waving without stopping. His muscles were giving out. His body had already reached its limit, but he refused to stop because he knew this could be the last chance of his life. Using every ounce of strength left in him, he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Here! We're here! Help us!" His voice echoed through the frozen valley, bouncing off the mountains, but it seemed that nothing reached the helicopter. He kept shouting again and again. Still, there was no answer. Slowly, the helicopter continued flying away. He watched it disappear into the distance. It moved farther and farther away until it vanished behind the mountains and finally disappeared from sight. At that moment, it felt as though all of his hope had disappeared with it. After such a long struggle, just when survival seemed to be within reach, he was once again crushed by despair. Completely broken, he pulled the woman into his arms and cried uncontrollably. He had no plan left, no path left, no hope left. His body had already given up, and now his spirit was beginning to surrender as well. He slowly lay down on the snow and gently held both of the woman's hands in his own. Gathering the last bit of strength he had, he whispered a few final words to her. His voice was barely audible, like the last flicker of a dying flame. Then his body could fight no longer. His eyelids grew heavy. His eyes slowly closed. At last, he lost consciousness and collapsed onto the snow. And with that, the movie comes to an end.